The dust swirled around Theresa Ann's ankles as she stood on the auction block in the scorching afternoon sun of Georgetown, Colorado, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst right through her rib cage. She had never imagined her life would come to this, being sold like livestock in the summer of 1882, but her stepmother had made it abundantly clear that morning that Theresa was nothing more than a burden to be rid of, a mouth that no longer deserved feeding now that her father was 6 months in the ground. Theresa was 20 years old, with dark chestnut hair that hung in waves past her shoulders, and green eyes that had lost most of their light in the past half-year. Her calico dress was faded but clean, mended in several places by her own careful stitching. She kept her gaze fixed on the mountains in the distance, trying to block out the voices of the men gathered below, their eyes assessing her like she was a horse or a piece of furniture. The humiliation burned through her veins like poison, but she refused to let them see her cry. Her stepmother Margaret stood off to the side with her arms crossed, her thin lips pressed into a satisfied line. She had wasted no time after Theresa's father died, selling off his mining claim for a pittance and drinking through most of the money within weeks. When that ran dry, she had turned her calculating eyes on Theresa, and the young woman had known her days of relative safety were numbered. The auctioneer, a portly man with sweat staining through his vest, cleared his throat and began his pitch. Now here we have a fine young woman, strong and healthy, good with household duties and cooking. She can read and write, gentlemen, educated by her late father, who was a respected man in this town. We will start the bidding at $50. Theresa felt bile rise in her throat. $50. That was what her stepmother had decided she was worth. A few voices called out bids, but they were half-hearted, curious rather than serious. Then a voice cut through the crowd, deep and rough, with an accent that spoke of too much whiskey and not enough conscience. $100. Theresa's eyes snapped to the source of the voice and her blood turned to ice. Silas Thornton was a man in his late 50s, a rancher who lived 15 miles outside of town and who was known for his cruelty to both animals and the unfortunate souls who worked for him. His previous 2 wives had both died under mysterious circumstances, though nothing had ever been proven. He was tall and gaunt, with mean little eyes set deep in a weathered face, and his hands were thick and scarred from years of violence. $100 from Mr. Thornton, the auctioneer announced, seeming pleased. Do I hear 110? Silence fell over the crowd. Several men shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to bid against Silas Thornton. The man had a reputation for holding grudges, and nobody wanted to cross him over a woman, no matter how pretty she might be. Theresa's knees began to shake. She had heard the whispers about Silas Thornton, about the bruises his ranch hands bore, about the screams that sometimes echoed from his ranch house late at night. She would rather die than go with him. But what choice did she have? Her stepmother had made sure she had no legal recourse, no family to turn to, no money of her own. Going once, the auctioneer called out. Theresa closed her eyes, praying for a miracle she knew would not come. Going twice, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms hard enough to draw blood. Going. $500, the voice rang out clear and strong, cutting through the tension like a blade. Every head in the crowd turned toward the speaker, and Theresa's eyes flew open. A man had stepped forward from the back of the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath a well-worn Stetson. He wore dusty trail clothes, a gun belt slung low on his hips, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The auctioneer's mouth fell open. "Did you say $500, sir?" "That's right." The man's voice was calm, steady, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in Texas or perhaps Kansas. $500 cash money, and I will pay it right now." Silas Thornton's face turned an ugly shade of purple. He pushed through the crowd toward the newcomer, his hand hovering near the gun at his hip. "Now you listen here, stranger. That girl is mine. I bid first." The tall man did not flinch. He stood his ground, his gray eyes cool and assessing as they met Silas's furious glare. Last I checked, this was an auction. Highest bid wins, unless the rules have changed in Georgetown. You do not know who you are dealing with, Silas hissed, stepping closer. The stranger's hand moved slightly, resting on the butt of his revolver in a casual gesture that somehow managed to be more threatening than any direct challenge could have been. I know exactly who I am dealing with, Thornton. The question is, do you know who you are dealing with? Something in the stranger's tone made Silas hesitate. His eyes narrowed, studying the other man more carefully. And after a long moment, he stepped back with a snarl. This is not over. I believe it is. The stranger turned to the auctioneer, dismissing Silas entirely. $500. Do I need to go higher, or can we conclude this business? The auctioneer looked between Silas and the stranger, clearly torn between fear and greed. Greed won out. $500? Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the Stetson? The stranger pulled a leather wallet from his coat and counted out the money with efficient movements. Theresa watched in stunned silence as he handed the bills to the auctioneer, who counted them twice before nodding in satisfaction. Margaret stepped forward to snatch her share, her eyes gleaming with avarice, and Theresa felt a fresh wave of hatred for the woman who had raised her since she was 12 years old. The stranger turned and walked toward the auction block, extending his hand to help Theresa down. She stared at his hand for a moment, her mind reeling. She had been saved from Silas Thornton, but who was this man? What did he want with her? Was she simply jumping from one fire into another? His gray eyes met hers, and she saw something there that surprised her. Kindness, maybe even sympathy. My name is Isaac Vaughn, he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I am not going to hurt you, miss. You have my word on that. Theresa did not know if she could believe him, but she also did not have much choice. She placed her trembling hand in his and let him help her down from the platform. His hand was warm and calloused, the hand of a working man, but his grip was gentle. Thank you, she whispered, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. Isaac nodded and released her hand, though he stayed close as they moved through the crowd. Theresa could feel eyes on them, curious and judgmental, and she kept her gaze fixed straight ahead. She would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing her shame. They walked to the edge of town where a fine bay horse was tied to a hitching post. Isaac untied the reins and turned to her. Can you ride? Yes. Her father had taught her when she was young, though it had been months since she had been on a horse. Good. He swung up into the saddle and then extended his arm down to her. Put your foot on mine and I will pull you up. Theresa did as he instructed, and a moment later she was seated behind him on the horse, her arms wrapped tentatively around his waist. She could feel the solid strength of him through his shirt, could smell the scent of leather and sage and something distinctly masculine. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment at the intimacy of it, but there was nothing to be done. Isaac guided the horse down the main street at a walk, not hurrying, as if he had no fear of Silas Thornton or anyone else. Theresa glanced back once and saw her stepmother standing with the money clutched in her hands, already counting it again. She felt nothing for the woman, no sadness or regret at leaving. Margaret had never been a mother to her, only a stranger who had married her father for security and then resented his daughter for existing. They rode in silence as Georgetown fell away behind them, the mountains rising up around them in their magnificent glory. The afternoon sun was still high in the sky, casting everything in shades of gold and amber. Theresa had lived in Colorado her whole life, but she had rarely ventured far from town and never alone with a strange man. After about 20 minutes, Isaac spoke. I have a cabin about an hour north of here, up in the high country. It's small but comfortable, and you will be safe there. Why did you do that? The question burst out of Theresa before she could stop herself. Why did you pay so much money for me? You do not even know me. Isaac was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. I knew your father, he said finally. Thomas Ashford. He helped me out of a bad situation a few years back. When I first came to Colorado, I owed him a debt." Theresa's eyes widened. "You knew my father?" "I did. He was a good man. When I rode into town this morning and heard what was happening, heard that Margaret was selling his daughter to the highest bidder, I knew I could not let that happen. Thomas would have wanted someone to look out for you." Tears stung Theresa's eyes, the first tears she had allowed herself since standing on that auction block. Her father had been a good man, perhaps too good, too trusting. He had believed that Margaret would care for Theresa after he was gone, had even put provisions in his will to that effect. But Margaret had found ways around those provisions, had claimed that Theresa was willful and disobedient, that she refused to earn her keep. All lies, but there had been no one to challenge her. "What do you want from me?" Theresa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You paid $500. That is a fortune." "I want you to be safe," Isaac said simply. "That is all. You can stay at my cabin until you figure out what you want to do with your life. I will not force you into anything, and I will not lay a hand on you. You have my word as a gentleman, though I know that may not mean much coming from a stranger." Theresa did not know what to say. She had been prepared for the worst, for cruelty and violence and degradation, and instead this man was offering her sanctuary. It seemed too good to be true, and yet there was something in his voice that made her want to believe him. They continued riding as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The trail climbed steadily upward, winding through groves of aspen and pine, crossing clear mountain streams that sparkled in the fading light. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation, and Theresa was grateful for the warmth of Isaac's body in front of her. Finally, just as dusk was settling over the mountains, they emerged into a small clearing. A log cabin sat nestled against the hillside, with a barn and corral nearby. Smoke curled from the chimney, and as they approached, a dog came bounding out to greet them, barking excitedly. "That's Copper," Isaac said with the first hint of warmth in his voice. "He's friendlier than he sounds." He dismounted, and then helped Theresa down, his hands steady at her waist. The moment her feet touched the ground, her knees buckled, exhausted from the tension and emotion of the day. Isaac caught her easily, supporting her weight until she found her balance. "Easy there," he said gently. "You've had a hell of a day." Theresa nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Copper danced around them, his tail wagging furiously, and despite everything she found herself smiling slightly at the dog's enthusiasm. Isaac led the horse to the barn while Theresa stood in the yard, uncertain what to do with herself. When he returned, he gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside, you must be hungry." The interior of the cabin was simple but well kept, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, a small kitchen area, and a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder. Everything was neat and organized, not what Theresa had expected from a bachelor living alone in the mountains. Isaac moved to the fireplace and stirred the coals, adding fresh wood. "I have stew from last night. It will just take a few minutes to heat up. There is a basin and pitcher over there if you want to wash up." Theresa moved to the basin gratefully, scrubbing her face and hands with the cool water. When she looked up, she caught sight of her reflection in a small mirror hanging on the wall. She looked pale and drawn, her eyes too large in her thin face. When had she become so fragile-looking? They ate in silence, sitting across from each other at the table. The stew was simple but good, and Theresa realized she had not eaten since early morning. She forced herself to eat slowly, not wanting to seem greedy, though her stomach growled in protest. After they had finished, Isaac leaned back in his chair and studied her for a moment. "I suppose you have questions." "A few hundred," Theresa admitted. A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I will answer what I can. What do you want to know?" "Who are you, really? You said you knew my father, but that does not explain much." Isaac nodded. "Fair enough. I am 30 years old, originally from Texas, though I've been moving around for most of my adult life. I worked as a cowboy, a ranch hand, a trail guide, whatever work I could find. About 3 years ago, I came to Colorado looking for a fresh start. I had gotten into some trouble back in Texas, nothing criminal, but trouble nonetheless. Your father helped me when most men would have turned me away. He gave me work at his mining claim, paid me fairly, treated me with respect. I only worked for him for about 6 months before I decided to head further west, but I never forgot his kindness. I do not remember you, Theresa said, trying to recall the various men who had worked for her father over the years. You were probably in town staying with friends or at school. Your father mentioned that you were away a lot during that time. I only saw you once, from a distance. Theresa absorbed this information, studying Isaac's face in the firelight. He had strong features, a straight nose, a firm jaw with a day's worth of stubble. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of hard living, but also kindness. She wanted to trust him, but trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. What happened in Texas? She asked. What kind of trouble? Isaac's expression darkened. The kind that involves a woman and a man who did not deserve her. I intervened in a situation that was not my business, and I made some powerful enemies. It seemed wise to leave before things escalated further. You protected someone. I tried to. He met her eyes. I was not entirely successful, but I did what I could, much like today. Theresa felt something shift in her chest, a small loosening of the tight knot of fear that had been choking her all day. You make a habit of rescuing people then. Only when they need rescuing, and I am in a position to help. He stood and moved to a trunk in the corner, pulling out a folded quilt. You can have the loft. I will sleep down here by the fire. There is a lock on the inside of the loft door if it makes you feel safer. The offer surprised her. You are giving me the bed? Of course. You are a guest in my home, and after what you have been through today, you deserve some privacy and comfort. Theresa stood, clutching the quilt to her chest. Isaac, I do not know how to thank you. You saved me from something truly horrible today. I know that does not begin to cover the debt I owe you. You do not owe me anything, Isaac said firmly. Your father helped me when I needed it. This is me paying that forward. Now get some rest. Things will look better in the morning. Theresa climbed the ladder to the loft, her legs shaking with exhaustion. The sleeping area was small but cozy, with a real mattress covered in clean linens. She had expected a hard pallet or a pile of furs, but this was comfortable, almost luxurious compared to what she had been sleeping on at Margaret's house the past few months. She changed out of her dress and into the nightgown she had managed to stuff into her small bundle of belongings, then crawled beneath the quilts. Through the gaps in the floorboards, she could see Isaac below, settling onto a bedroll near the fireplace with Copper curled up beside him. For the first time in months, Theresa felt something like hope stirring in her chest. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, did not know if she could truly trust this stranger who had bought her freedom. But for tonight, she was safe. That was more than she had dared to hope for this morning. She closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under, dreams mercifully absent for the first time in weeks. When Theresa woke, pale morning light was filtering through the small window in the loft. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, and then the events of yesterday came flooding back. She sat up slowly, every muscle in her body aching from tension and the long ride. The smell of coffee drifted up from below, along with the sound of someone moving quietly around the cabin. Theresa dressed quickly, braiding her hair with practiced efficiency, and climbed down the ladder. Isaac was at the stove, cooking what looked like bacon and biscuits. He glanced over as she descended, nodding and greeting. "Morning. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Theresa admitted. "Thank you." "Coffee is in the pot. Cups are on the shelf there." They fell into an easy routine, working around each other in the small kitchen space. Theresa found herself relaxing slightly, appreciating the normalcy of it all. They ate breakfast together as the sun rose higher, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "I need to ride into town today," Isaac said as they finished eating. "I have some business to attend to. You are welcome to come with me, or you can stay here if you prefer. Either way is fine." Theresa considered. The thought of going back to Georgetown made her stomach churn, but she also did not relish the idea of being alone in an unfamiliar place. What kind of business? I need to file some paperwork at the land office, and I want to send a telegram to a friend in Denver. Nothing exciting. I will come with you, Theresa decided. I should not hide away forever. And there are a few things I would like to purchase if you could advance me some money. I will pay you back once I find work. Isaac nodded. You do not need to pay me back, but if you want to earn your keep, I could use help around here. The cabin needs attention, and I'm not much of a cook. If you are willing to handle the household duties, I will pay you a fair wage, same as I would pay any hired help. The offer was generous, almost too generous, and Theresa studied him carefully, looking for any sign of ulterior motives. But his gray eyes were clear and honest, and she found herself nodding. That seems fair, but I insist on paying you back for whatever I purchased today. Stubborn, Isaac said, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. I can respect that. They rode back to Georgetown mid-morning, Theresa once again seated behind Isaac on his horse. The town was busy with activity, miners and merchants going about their daily business. Several people stared as they rode past, and Theresa could see the whispers starting, the speculative glances. News of yesterday's auction would have spread through town like wildfire, and she knew she would be the subject of gossip for weeks to come. Let them talk. She held her head high, refusing to be ashamed. She had done nothing wrong. Isaac helped her down in front of the general store. I will be at the land office if you need me. Take your time. Theresa entered the store, grateful for the dim coolness after the bright sunlight outside. Mrs. Henderson, the shopkeeper's wife, looked up from behind the counter, her expression carefully neutral. Miss Ashford, what can I do for you today? I need some fabric for a new dress, Theresa said, keeping her voice steady, and thread, needles, and some other sundries. Mrs. Henderson nodded and began pulling bolts of fabric from the shelves. As Theresa examined her options, she heard the bell above the door jingle, and two women entered the store. She recognized them immediately, Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Wilkes, two of the biggest gossips in Georgetown. Well, if it is not the auction girl, Mrs. Patterson said loudly, her voice dripping with false sympathy. How are you faring, dear? We were all so shocked by what happened yesterday. Theresa gritted her teeth. I am doing well, thank you. And the cowboy who bought you, Mrs. Wilkes chimed in, her eyes glittering with malicious curiosity. Isaac Vaughn, is that his name? What sort of man pays $500 for a woman? People are wondering, you understand? Mr. Vaughn was a friend of my father's, Theresa said coldly. He has been nothing but kind and respectful to me. Not that it is any of your business. Mrs. Patterson exchanged a knowing look with Mrs. Wilkes. Of course, dear. We are just concerned for your welfare, that is all. A young woman alone with a strange man in the mountains, well, people will talk. Then let them talk, Theresa snapped, her patience exhausted. I would rather be alone with an honorable stranger than surrounded by people who stood by and watched while my stepmother sold me like a piece of property. Where was your concern then, Mrs. Patterson? Where were you when I needed help? Mrs. Patterson's face flushed an ugly red. Well, I never. No, you never did, Theresa agreed. You never helped, never intervened, never spoke up. So forgive me if I do not value your opinion now. She turned back to Mrs. Henderson, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. I will take 3 yards of the blue calico, please, and the other items I mentioned. Mrs. Henderson quickly measured and cut the fabric, wrapping everything in brown paper. Theresa paid for her purchases with the money Isaac had given her, then swept out of the store without another glance at the two gossiping women. Outside, she nearly collided with a man on the sidewalk. She stepped back with an apology on her lips, then froze as she recognized Silas Thornton. His eyes narrowed as he looked down at her, and she could smell whiskey on his breath, even though it was barely noon. Well, well, he drawled, if it is not the girl who got away, you and your cowboy made a fool of me yesterday. Excuse me, Theresa said, trying to step around him. He moved to block her path, his hand shooting out to grab her arm. His fingers dug into her flesh painfully. "We are not done talking." "Yes, we are." A new voice cut in, cold and hard. Isaac appeared at Theresa's side, his hand resting casually on his gun. "Let her go, Thornton." Silas's grip tightened for a moment, and Theresa winced. Then reluctantly he released her and stepped back. "You are making a mistake, Vaughn. That girl is more trouble than she is worth." "That is my concern, not yours. You lost the bid. Time to move on." "This is not over," Silas hissed, echoing his words from the day before. "Actually, it is." Isaac's voice was quiet, but carried an unmistakable edge of menace. "And if I hear that you have been bothering Miss Ashford or spreading lies about her, we are going to have a problem. A serious problem. Do I make myself clear?" For a moment the two men stared at each other, and Theresa held her breath, certain that violence was about to erupt. Then Silas spat on the ground and stalked away, his shoulders rigid with fury. Isaac watched him go, then turned to Theresa. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I am fine, just bruised." She rubbed her arm where Silas had grabbed her, knowing there would be fingerprints there later. "I am sorry. I should not have left you alone." Isaac looked genuinely distressed, and it occurred to Theresa that he felt responsible for her safety. "You could not have known he would be here. It is not your fault." She held up her package. "I got what I needed. Can we go home now?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. Home. Isaac's cabin was not her home. Not really. But it felt more like home than anywhere she had been in the past 6 months. If Isaac noticed her slip, he did not comment on it. They collected his horse and rode out of town, and Theresa was grateful to leave Georgetown behind. She did not look back. Over the next few weeks, Theresa settled into a routine at Isaac's cabin. She rose early each morning to prepare breakfast, then spent her days cleaning, mending, cooking, and gradually making the cabin more comfortable. Isaac was often out working on various projects around the property, tending to his small herd of cattle, hunting for meat, or working on repairs to the barn and fences. They developed an easy companionship, talking over meals about everything and nothing. Isaac told her stories of his travels, the places he had been and the people he had met. Theresa talked about her childhood, about her mother who had died when she was young, about her father and the mining claim that had consumed so much of his time and energy. They never spoke of the auction, of Silas Thornton, or of what the future might hold. It was as if they had made an unspoken agreement to live in the present, to let each day unfold without worrying too much about tomorrow. Theresa found herself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit by the fireplace, and Isaac would read aloud from one of his small collection of books. His voice was deep and soothing, and she loved watching his face in the firelight as he read, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at a particularly amusing passage. She was falling in love with him. The realization came to her one morning as she watched him chop wood, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, his movements efficient and practiced. She loved his quiet strength, his kindness, the way he treated her with respect and never made her feel like a burden. She loved the sound of his laughter, rare but wonderful when it came. She loved the way he was gentle with Copper, the way he took care of the animals, the way he looked at the mountains with such appreciation. But she did not know if he felt the same way. He was unfailingly polite, always respectful, never crossing the invisible line that separated employer from employee, host from guest. Sometimes she would catch him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, but before she could analyze it, he would turn away, and the moment would be lost. Summer deepened into August, and the wildflowers bloomed across the mountain meadows. One Saturday, Isaac suggested they ride up to a high alpine lake he knew to spend the day fishing and enjoying the scenery. Theresa agreed eagerly, happy for the excuse to spend more time with him away from the daily chores. They packed a lunch and set out early, riding through forests of pine and spruce, climbing ever higher until they emerged above the tree line. The lake was a perfect jewel of blue-green water, surrounded by rocky peaks that still held snow in their high crevices despite the summer heat. They spent the afternoon fishing, though neither of them was particularly successful. Theresa did not mind. She was content to sit on the rocky shore, listening to the wind whisper across the water, watching Isaac as he moved along the edge of the lake with his fishing rod. They ate their lunch in companionable silence, then lay back on a flat rock, letting the sun warm their faces. Copper dozed between them, his sides rising and falling with contented breaths. "This is beautiful," Theresa said softly. "Thank you for bringing me here. I thought you might like it. I come up here sometimes when I need to think." "What do you think about?" Isaac was quiet for a long moment. "Lots of things. The choices I have made, the paths not taken, what I want for my future." Theresa turned her head to look at him. "Have you figured it out?" "Some of it." He met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her breath catch. "I know that I like having you at the cabin. I like coming home at the end of the day and finding you there. I like talking with you, laughing with you. I like the way you have made that old cabin feel like a real home." Theresa's heart began to race. "Isaac, I know this was not what you chose," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I know you did not ask for any of this, and the last thing I want is to make you feel obligated to me. But I need you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with that auction, nothing to do with the money I paid or the debt I owed your father. Somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, Theresa. Completely and irrevocably in love." Tears sprang to Theresa's eyes. "Oh, Isaac, I love you too. I've been so afraid to say anything, afraid that you only saw me as a responsibility, as someone you had to take care of." Isaac reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "You are not a responsibility. You are the best thing that has happened to me in years. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and I count myself the luckiest man alive that I was in Georgetown that day." "Kiss me," Theresa whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, and then his lips met hers in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. Theresa felt like she was falling and flying at the same time, her entire body alive with sensation. She had been kissed before, quick stolen kisses from boys she had known in town, but nothing had prepared her for this, for the overwhelming rightness of being in Isaac's arms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you, Theresa. I want to do this properly, the way your father would have wanted. Will you be my wife?" "Yes," Theresa said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." They spent the rest of the afternoon planning their future, talking about everything they wanted to do together. Isaac wanted to expand his ranch, maybe build a bigger house eventually. Theresa wanted to start a garden, maybe get some chickens. They both wanted children, a whole houseful if they were blessed. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, they reluctantly mounted the horse and began the journey back down the mountain. Theresa rode with her arms wrapped tight around Isaac's waist, her cheek pressed against his back, happier than she had ever been in her life. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Georgetown. It was a quiet affair with only a few witnesses, including Mrs. Henderson from the general store and her husband, who had always been kind to Theresa. Isaac wore a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, and Theresa wore a dress of pale blue silk that she had sewn herself from fabric Isaac had insisted on buying for her. As they stood before the minister and exchanged their vows, Theresa felt her father's presence like a warm embrace. He would have liked Isaac, would have approved of this match. He would have been happy to know that his daughter had found love and safety with a good man. The gossips of Georgetown were notably absent from the ceremony, but Theresa did not care. She had Isaac, and that was all that mattered. They spent their wedding night at the cabin, and Isaac was gentle and patient, making sure Theresa felt cherished and loved. Afterward, lying in his arms in the darkness, she marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few short months. She had gone from despair to joy, from being sold like property to being a beloved wife. The autumn came with its display of gold and crimson leaves, and Theresa threw herself into preparing the cabin for winter. She preserved vegetables from the garden Isaac had helped her plant, dried herbs, put up jars of jam and pickles. Isaac hunted, and they smoked meat, stocking the small root cellar for the cold months ahead. One afternoon in early October, Theresa was in the cabin making bread when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door, her heart sinking when she saw who it was. Silas Thornton sat astride his horse in the yard, flanked by two rough-looking men she did not recognize. Isaac was out checking the cattle in the upper pasture and would not be back for at least an hour. Theresa fought down her fear and stepped onto the porch, keeping one hand on the doorframe. "Mr. Thornton, what do you want?" Silas grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "I think you know what I want, Mrs. Vaughn. Or should I say the woman I paid for?" "You did not pay for me. My husband outbid you fair and square." "Did he, though?" Silas dismounted and took a step toward the porch. "See, I have been thinking about that day. $500 is a lot of money for a drifting cowboy to have in his pocket. Makes a man wonder if the bid was legitimate, or if your husband was running some kind of con. That is ridiculous. Isaac earned that money honestly. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, I think it is time I collected what I am owed. See, I had plans for you, girl. Plans that got interrupted. And I do not like being made a fool of in front of the whole town." Theresa's hand moved to the rifle that Isaac kept by the door. "You need to leave, now." Silas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Or what? You're going to shoot me? I do not think so, little girl. You do not have the stomach for it." He took another step forward, and Theresa raised the rifle, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "Do not test me. I will protect what is mine." "You hear that, boys?" Silas called to his companions. "She is going to protect what is hers. That is real cute." The two men dismounted and began to spread out, clearly intending to surround the cabin. Theresa's mind raced. She knew she could not fight off three men, not alone, but she could not let them into the cabin, could not let Silas Thornton win. She fired a shot into the air, the report echoing across the mountains. Copper, who had been dozing under a tree, leaped to his feet and began barking furiously. The horses shied nervously. "That was a warning shot," Theresa said, quickly reloading. "The next one will not be." Silas's face darkened with rage. "You little—" Another gunshot cracked through the air, this one kicking up dirt at Silas's feet. He jumped back with a curse, and everyone turned to see Isaac riding hard down the trail, his rifle in one hand, reins in the other. "The lady told you to leave," Isaac called out as he approached. "I suggest you listen." He dismounted in one fluid motion, moving to stand beside Theresa on the porch. His presence was solid and reassuring, and Theresa felt some of her fear drain away. Silas's two companions looked at each other nervously, clearly reconsidering their involvement in this venture. Isaac had the look of a man who knew how to use the weapon in his hands, and his gray eyes were cold as winter ice. "This is trespassing, Thornton," Isaac said quietly, "and threatening my wife. That is two good reasons for me to shoot you where you stand. Do you want to give me a third?" "You cannot keep her locked away up here forever," Silas spat. "Eventually she will have to come to town, and when she does, she will be accompanied by her husband, who will be very interested to hear if you have been making threats." Isaac took a step forward, his rifle still pointed at Silas. "Let me make something crystal clear. If you ever come near my wife again, if you ever speak to her, look at her wrong, or even think about her, I will know. And when I find out, I will come for you. Not to arrest you, not to argue with you, but to end you. Do you understand?" The menace in Isaac's voice was unmistakable, and even Silas seemed to recognize that he had pushed too far. He remounted his horse with a snarl. "You are both going to regret this." "The only one with regrets here is you," Isaac replied. Now get off my property before I forget that I'm a civilized man." Silas and his men rode off, disappearing down the trail in a cloud of dust. Isaac waited until they were out of sight before lowering his rifle and turning to Theresa. She was shaking now that the danger had passed, the rifle slipping from her nerveless fingers. Isaac caught her before she fell, pulling her into his arms. "You are safe. I am here. You are safe." "I was so frightened," she whispered against his chest. "He said such horrible things, and I thought, I know. But you were incredibly brave. You held him off until I got here." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "I heard your warning shot all the way up in the high pasture. I knew something was wrong, and I came as fast as I could." "What are we going to do?" "He is not going to give up." Isaac's jaw tightened. "We are going to make sure he does not have a choice. Tomorrow we are riding into Georgetown, and we are going to see the sheriff. We are going to file an official complaint about what happened here today, and we are going to make sure everyone knows that if something happens to either of us, Silas Thornton is the first person they should look at." "Will that be enough?" "It will have to be. But Theresa, I need you to understand something. Men like Silas Thornton, they are bullies and cowards at heart. They prey on the weak and the vulnerable. But you are not vulnerable anymore. You have me, and I have you, and together we are stronger than anything he can throw at us." Theresa nodded, drawing strength from his conviction. "I love you, Isaac Vaughn." "I love you too, more than I can possibly say." They went into town the next day as promised, and Isaac filed a formal complaint with Sheriff Morrison. The sheriff was a decent man, older and weathered, who had known Thomas Ashford and respected him. He listened to their story with a grim expression and promised to have a talk with Silas Thornton. Word of the incident spread quickly through Georgetown, and public opinion began to shift in Theresa and Isaac's favor. People who had stood by during the auction now seemed embarrassed by their silence, and several townspeople went out of their way to be friendly to the young couple. Mrs. Henderson made a point of inviting them to Sunday dinner, and even the minister offered Isaac work helping to repair the church roof. Silas Thornton kept his distance after that, though Theresa would sometimes catch sight of him in town, watching her with hate-filled eyes. But he never approached her again, and after a few months she stopped looking over her shoulder quite so often. Winter came to the high country with a vengeance, bringing deep snows and howling winds. Theresa and Isaac were snowed in for weeks at a time, but they did not mind. The cabin was warm and cozy, and they had each other. During those long winter evenings, they talked about everything under the sun. Isaac taught Theresa to play chess with a set he had carved himself, and she taught him to knit, though he was terrible at it, and they both laughed at his lopsided attempts at scarves. They read books aloud to each other, cooked elaborate meals just for fun, and made love with a passion and tenderness that never seemed to fade. In early February, Theresa realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another few weeks to be sure, then told Isaac the news one evening as they sat by the fire. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and then a slow smile spread across his face. "A baby? We are going to have a baby?" "Yes," Theresa said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Probably sometime in early September." Isaac swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "We are going to have a baby. I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Theresa said, cupping his face in her hands. "Our child is so lucky." They spent the rest of the winter and spring preparing for the baby's arrival. Isaac built a beautiful cradle from pine wood, carving delicate designs into the headboard. Theresa sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart full of love for the child she had not yet met. The baby came on a warm September evening, as the sun was setting behind the mountains. The local midwife, Mrs. Cooper, attended the birth, and after several hours of labor, Theresa delivered a healthy baby boy with a lusty cry and a full head of dark hair. Isaac held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect. Absolutely perfect. What should we name him? Theresa asked, exhausted but happy. Isaac looked down at the tiny face, then back at his wife. Thomas, after your father, if that is all right with you. Fresh tears filled Theresa's eyes. It is more than all right. It is perfect. Little Thomas Vaughn thrived, growing strong and healthy under his parents' loving care. He had his father's gray eyes and his mother's smile, and he brought more joy into their lives than they had thought possible. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Grace, who had Theresa's green eyes and a determined spirit that made them both laugh. 3 years after that came another son, Samuel, who was quiet and thoughtful from the very beginning. The ranch prospered over the years. Isaac expanded the cattle herd and built a larger house, with separate bedrooms for the children and a proper parlor for entertaining. Theresa started her garden, which grew to be the pride of the county, and she began selling her excess vegetables and preserves in Georgetown. Her reputation as a baker spread, and she was soon supplying bread and pies to the general store. Silas Thornton died during a particularly harsh winter in 1890, thrown from his horse during a blizzard and freezing to death before he could find shelter. Theresa felt no joy at the news, only relief that the threat he had represented was finally gone. The years passed in a blur of activity and love. Their children grew tall and strong, educated at the small schoolhouse in Georgetown and at home by their parents, who valued learning above all things. Thomas grew into a fine young man who loved the ranch and everything about it. Grace became a talented artist, her drawings and paintings capturing the beauty of the Colorado mountains. Samuel developed a passion for books and learning, and Isaac and Theresa saved money to send him to college in Denver when he came of age. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Isaac and Theresa stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved. Their children were grown now, Thomas running the ranch operations, Grace married to a kind young man from town, and Samuel away at school studying to become a teacher. Do you ever think about that day in Georgetown? Theresa asked, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. The auction? Sometimes, Isaac admitted, but not with regret. Never with regret. That day brought you into my life, and I will be forever grateful for it. I was so frightened that day. I thought my life was over. And instead, it was just beginning. Isaac turned to face her, taking her hands in his. We have built something beautiful here, Theresa. A home, a family, a life full of love and purpose. Your father would be proud of you. He would be proud of both of us, Theresa corrected. She stood on her tiptoes to kiss her husband, still feeling that spark of passion and connection that had drawn them together all those years ago. They stood together as darkness fell, the stars beginning to emerge overhead, the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night all around them. Inside the house, lamplight glowed warm and welcoming, and Theresa could hear Thomas moving around, checking that everything was secure for the night. This was home. This was family. This was the life she had dreamed of during those dark days when she thought she had no future. Isaac had given her not just safety and security, but love, partnership, and a chance to become the woman she was meant to be. In the spring of 1903, when Theresa was 41 years old, she became a grandmother for the first time. Grace gave birth to a beautiful baby girl they named Hope, and Theresa cried when she held her granddaughter for the first time, marveling at the continuation of their family line. Isaac was a devoted grandfather, carving toys for little Hope and spoiling her shamelessly. He was 63 now, his hair more silver than dark, but he was still strong and vital, still working the ranch alongside Thomas, still looking at Theresa with the same love and devotion he had shown from the very beginning. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by family and friends, with a party that brought people from all over the county. The young couple who had married under such unusual circumstances had become pillars of the community, respected and loved for their hard work, their integrity, and their generosity to those in need. That night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, Isaac and Theresa sat in the parlor, his arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. 25 years, Theresa mused. Sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday that you rode into Georgetown and changed my life. Other times it feels like I have known you forever. I knew from the moment I saw you standing on that auction block that you were special, Isaac said. There was something in your eyes, a strength and determination that called to me. I could not let Thornton have you. It would have been like watching a light go out in the world. You saved me that day? In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, Isaac corrected gently. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something lasting. Before you, I was just drifting, going from place to place with no real purpose. You gave me purpose. You gave me love. You gave me a family and a home. Theresa turned in his arms to look up at him. Despite the years, despite the gray in his hair and the lines on his face, he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. I love you, Isaac Vaughn. I will love you until my dying day and beyond. And I love you, Theresa Vaughn. You are my heart, my home, my everything. They kissed in the lamplight, surrounded by photographs of their children and grandchildren, by the beautiful home they had built together, by the evidence of a life well lived and full of love. The years continued to roll by, bringing both joy and sorrow, as all years do. They buried friends and celebrated new births. They weathered economic downturns and celebrated good harvests. Through it all, their love remained constant, a bedrock foundation that supported them through whatever life brought their way. Thomas married a lovely young woman named Elizabeth, and they gave Isaac and Theresa 3 more grandchildren. Samuel finished his education and returned to Georgetown to teach at the school, marrying his childhood sweetheart and settling into a life of quiet contentment. Grace and her husband opened a photography studio in town, and her artistic talent flourished. In the summer of 1915, Isaac and Theresa celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary. Isaac was 75 now, moving a bit slower, but still sharp of mind and strong of spirit. Theresa was 53, her chestnut hair liberally streaked with gray, but her green eyes still sparkled with life and love. They took a ride up to the Alpine Lake where Isaac had first told her he loved her, moving slowly but still able to make the journey. The wildflowers were in bloom, painting the meadows in brilliant colors, and the sky was that perfect blue that only exists at high altitude. They spread a blanket by the lake and shared a simple lunch, reminiscing about their years together, about the children and grandchildren they had been blessed with, about the life they had built from nothing but love and determination. Do you have any regrets? Isaac asked as they lay side by side watching clouds drift by overhead. Theresa considered the question seriously. I regret that my father did not live to see the life I have built, to meet you and our children. I regret that Margaret's greed and cruelty put me in that position in the first place. But the outcome? No. I do not regret a single moment since you bid on me that day. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Isaac Vaughn. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me. He rolled to his side, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. We have had a good life, have we not? The best life, Theresa agreed, full of love and purpose and meaning. What more could anyone ask for? They stayed at the lake until the sun began to set, then made their way slowly back down the mountain to the ranch that had been their home for more than 3 decades. The next generation was running things now, but there was still a place for the elder Vaughns, still work to be done and love to be shared. Isaac lived to be 82, passing peacefully in his sleep on a cold winter night in 1922. Theresa held his hand as he took his last breath, tears streaming down her face, but her heart full of gratitude for the years they had shared. He had been her rock, her love, her partner in all things, and saying goodbye was the hardest thing she had ever done. But she did not despair. She had their children and grandchildren around her, had the legacy of love they had built together. She continued to live at the ranch, helping with the great-grandchildren who were beginning to arrive, tending her garden, baking her pies, sharing stories of their grandfather with the younger generation. Theresa lived for another 12 years, surrounded by family and love until the very end. When she died in her sleep in the spring of 1934 at the age of 72, her last thoughts were of Isaac, of the day he had stepped forward to save her, of the life they had built together from the ashes of her despair. They buried her next to Isaac on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone that read, Theresa Ann Vaughn, beloved wife, mother and grandmother, 1862-1934, loved beyond measure. Their story became a legend in Georgetown, told and retold over the years, of the young woman sold at auction and the cowboy who saved her, of a love that transcended the ugly circumstances of its beginning and flourished into something beautiful and lasting. Their descendants continued to work the ranch for generations, always remembering the couple who had started it all, who had turned tragedy into triumph and built an empire of love that would last long after they were gone. And on quiet summer evenings, when the sun set over the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and pink, some folks swore they could see two figures standing hand in hand on the hillside, watching over the land and the family they had created together, their love eternal and unshakable, a testament to the power of courage, kindness, and the resilience of the human heart.